Good morning. My name is Jeff Phillip. I am on the Board of Trustees for Cedars Unitarian Universalist Church, and I welcome you this morning. Just a couple of things to highlight over the next couple of weeks. Next week, on May 30th, is our Super Supper, where we join with Congregational Kol Shalom to help feed folks in the community at the Eagle Harbor Church down in Winslow. If you're interested in helping out with that, you can reach out to me or to Mike Cox. We can always use more support. And I'll also make you aware that we'll be having our annual congregational meeting on Sunday, June 11th, immediately after the service. So I hope you'll all be able to stick around after that. We'll do some end-of-year business and have some good discussion. Thank you, and have a good service.
Welcome to Cedars Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm Nancy Phillip, and I'm delighted to be worship associate for our guest, Reverend Amanda Aikman. The Reverend Amanda Aikman comes to us this morning from her home in Everett, where she lives with her spousal unit, Nancy, and the world's most annoying cat, Mousehole. Amanda is retired after serving UU congregations in Washington and British Columbia for 25 years, including a stint as a worship associate consultant with us here at Cedars in 2017. And I have a little anecdote to share about Amanda becoming our consultant. I was president of the Board of Trustees during that period, and we had several events centered around Barbara and Jocko ten Hove's retirement. We had a huge party on the same day as the Women's March, right after the inauguration of the former president, and that was a big deal, very emotional. And then the very next day we had their Sunday morning retirement service with lots of guests who flew in. So it had to be on that weekend. And I was really, really emotional. I had a lot going on. I was facilitating this whole transition. And so at the end of the big party that we had that night after the long day of the Women's March, I sat with Amanda, and after we said goodbye, I was really emotional. Amanda said gently but firmly, "Nancy, you need to stop crying." And it hit just the right way because it worked, and I ended up being able to get through the Sunday service without completely falling apart. So thank you, Amanda.
I don't remember any of this.
It's probably better that way. But I really appreciate everything you did to help us transition. Amanda, getting back to her biography, Amanda is the author of a brand new novel, Miss Lister's Guest House, and is available from Amazon or from the author. Says the author, the reviews are fabulous, but sales are a bit sluggish. Hint, hint. Welcome. I bought it, and I'm going to start reading it today. So, at Cedars, we worship with open hearts. You are welcome here, whether young or old, no matter who you are, no matter who you love. We believe in freedom of speech, body sovereignty, expressing yourself through your art and your gifts, speaking truth to power, and loving without judgment. We recognize, honor, and thank the Coast Salish tribes, the Suquamish, Duwamish, Clallam, and Chimicum, who were here first. I'll share a short poem by William Wordsworth. I wandered lonely as a cloud, for oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, They flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. Come, let us worship. That was beautiful, Meredith. Thank you. I'm one of these parents who understands and tries to remember that I am learning more from my adult children now than I ever taught them in the years they were growing up in my house. My daughter Lydia is a very positive person, just naturally positive. Ask anyone who spent time with her. In the past couple of years, she's used the phrase spiritual bypassing to identify, you laugh, a practice that someone in her life uses like a magic wand to wave away the negativity. This really bothers her, but I was having a difficult time understanding why this is a problem. Isn't it okay to be upbeat and positive? My understanding now, after much discussion, because this is a really hard concept for me to understand, much discussion and much internet research, that spiritual bypassing is the act of using spiritual practices, wellness practices, or positive thoughts to somehow erase negative things that are just a part of life, everyday life, in an attempt to kind of make them go away, push them off to the side, instead of addressing those negative things or just acknowledging that they're always going to be there. The problem with bypassing is that if you ignore this problem or think you're the problem that you're trying to bypass, or think you're making it go away with positive thinking, it will reappear in life, bigger and harder to navigate. I think I get the general idea. It's like if you ignore a warning light on your car's dashboard telling you to attend something and say, it's okay, I just had the car detailed, so it'll be fine. Basically, if you ignore the little signal citing a different good thing, the whole system will eventually break down. You have to pay attention to the warning signs. At the same time, you need to keep the bad things that are going on in life and in the world in balance with the good stuff. This balancing act is tricky. It seems like, for me anyway, when my mind wanders, it automatically drifts over to the negative stuff, or the things to worry about. Luckily, I've developed some mental tools to help me set aside these thoughts. I don't get rid of them, I just set them aside to deal with later. Sometimes it takes a lot of discipline to stay focused on the good stuff. Our family, or at least the members who live in Washington State, has adopted a practice that instantly lifts us out of a negative mood. It doesn't solve anything, it just helps us get recentered. Here's the origin story of this practice. The final Harry Potter book, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, came out in April 2007. We, as a family, were simultaneously filled with excitement and dread. Excitement because we were all interested in finding out how it ends, and dread at the thought of reading that final page of the final Harry Potter book. The end. No more Harry Potter books. What will we do? Our eldest daughter, Marina, was in that age group of kids who were new readers when the Harry Potter's book series started. She was like 6 when that first book came out and read it voraciously. All of these kids grew up on the series, and Marina had all the books fully internalized. When we would go to see the movie, she would point out all the little details that were missed, added, or changed from each book. She would say all these things in the movie, and we're like, let's just watch the movie, come on. And she wouldn't let it go. It was really cute and annoying. Now, I'm convinced that the entire demographic of these kids who are now in their early 30s, they have all internalized their Harry Potter series. So, the day of publication of this last book, we knew the drill. Go to Barnes & Noble at midnight, in costume, buy the book with all the other excited kids and sleep-deprived working parents. Marina and all the other kids will read the book in one day, like they did with the 5th and 6th books, which are also 700 to 800 pages long. They all read these books in one day. So, the morning of the day and night that Marina read the book, because she did read it in one day, we got up. Marina was still in the living room, asleep on the couch. We knew she had finished the book and was super duper sad because she cried when she finished the 5th and 6th books. So we were just really dreading how she would feel after the whole thing was over. So there she is asleep on the couch. The television is still on, and on the television menu, the TV menu, is the menu for the movie Elf. She dug up the movie from our holiday section out of our DVDs and watched Elf with Will Ferrell, Bob Newhart, and James Caan to soothe her sadness at finishing the book series. It broke our hearts a little because of all the things she could have done, she needed to watch one of our family holiday favorites in April to cheer herself up. And now we've adopted this maneuver. If something happens that we need a quick pivot from, regardless of the time of year, we watch Elf. We don't do it a lot, but when we do, it does the trick. Yesterday, I called Marina to ask permission to share this story, and she said yes, thanks for asking, and she did not remember watching Elf after finishing the book. So, my takeaway from this moment is that the moment and that memory of her finishing the book and watching Elf traumatized me more than it traumatized her. And the other takeaway is, it's okay every once in a while to use your favorite holiday movie to cheer yourself up. I dedicate the lighting of the chalice to accentuating the positive. So please repeat our affirmation printed in the order of service with me. As we come together to worship, we remind ourselves to treat all people kindly because we are one family, to take good care of the earth because it is our home, and to live lives full of love and goodness because that is how we will all become the best that we can be. Now stand in body or spirit and join us for hymn number 38, our hymn of the month, Morning Has Broken. Okay. Every once in a while, we get stuck in bad news. So I wanted to see if we could try a little exercise that pulls us out of that negative thing. Time for All Ages is something that I'm uncomfortable with. I will be very honest. You have to know this. But I asked Archer, you may remember him, our former religious education administrator, who was really good at this. I happen to know him. I asked if I could use one of his special tools. I had to kind of talk him into it. So here it is. I think I put it right here. You got it, Aiden. I decided to pull out the vessel. So here's how the vessel works. First of all, the vessel, it's a sacred tool created by Archer, and it holds our stories, the stories that we share in Time for All Ages. So here's what I would like to do. The rules are, they're not really rules, but just guidelines. I'm going to toss the vessel to somebody, and what I want you to share today is something in the news that's good, a piece of good news from the last week or two. And I'm going to share mine just to sort of give you an idea. I was really excited that Brittany Griner, the WNBA basketball player, got to play her first game. Yeah, so that made me happy. It's a piece of good news. So I'm going to gently throw the vessel to somebody, and if you get the vessel, you share your piece of news, or you always have the opportunity, you always have the option to pass. Just know that. So I'm going to start with my husband. I can tell Fran wants one.
So something that I read recently in our local paper is that the mobile home court that is near where I live has been taken over by a larger company. And so they are requiring that every resident improve their property. So, because it really would so they're requiring them to paint and stuff like that, which a lot of those folks don't have the money to do. The city of Poulsbo has set aside $15,000 to help those folks pay for the improvements that they need to keep their properties up. And Fishline is partnering with them to match that with another $15,000 so that those folks can afford to their homes up and keep their homes.
That's good.
So let's go, how about Rod?
Don't let it break.
I'm going to pass because I really haven't paid attention to the news for the last week. So.
Okay.
So I was born and brought up in Florida, and so it's really breaking my heart what's been going on there. I wasn't born there actually, but I was brought up there. So it was great to see last week that Donna Deegan got elected mayor of Jacksonville. She's a Democrat, 12-point advantage over her 4.5. Anyway, we made her.
Good.
Yeah, this was fun and spot. I think something positive. Well, without going into great detail, I was able to help one of my neighbors this week who is in a, again, without going into great detail, was in a domestic dispute. So I was able to go over and help out, go take her to get some food, and things have resolved pretty well as of this morning. So that was nice to do.
Now go ahead and toss the vessel.
I haven't really kept up on the news, but it's just nice to be home. I got to see some extended family I haven't seen for like 2 years this last week, so that was really nice.
I've actually also been watching less news, but good news and sort of personal. Yesterday was my best friend's ordination anniversary, and that was great news. We had a good phone call and chatted about it. So I will toss it maybe to Jay.
Thank you for being so careful, Jane.
I teach at Pratt Fine Arts Center in Seattle, and it's been mostly closed for the past 2 years. But last weekend, they had a fabulous fundraising event, an auction. They raised more than they expected to. So the place is thriving and wonderful, and it's a delight to be there and teach.
Oh, Fran, please.
So, I'm Fran Horton, and I'm deputized to tell some very good news about an event we had here on Bainbridge Island yesterday. And there are 5 of us in this church that were part of this electric vehicle and bike expo.
That's
It was
great.
held at the Woodward School, and it was a huge success. We had car dealers, we had car owners, we had lots of enthusiasm for electric cars and electric bikes. And Autumn Salamak, our climate manager for the city, told all the stuff the city is doing, and it was totally inspiring. And it just felt like we are part of a revolution that is happening, and this is the pivot point where it's all going to change. Thank you.
The-
Yeah, pass the vessel, Fran.
Fran, I'll take that vessel back.
Oh, yes, but I have to tell who those members are. Sandy Spear, Mike Cox has been an incredible leader on this. Herb Heathcote organized all the spaces, and Jane, of course, made sure there was no waste. It was amazing. So thanks to everybody.
All right. I'm going to put the vessel away. And just remind everybody, isn't it good to focus on the good stuff? Try to think of a good thing in the morning, and instead of letting your mind go right to the negative, and I think we'll all be better off. Okay. Joys with us so we can celebrate with you. Share your sorrows with us so you don't have to experience them alone. if you do have a joy or sorrow, and we've heard many joys already, but feel free to come up again and put a stone in the water, or I get it backwards all the time. Water in the bowl for your joy, or in a stone in the water for your sorrow. Come up, let us know your name, and feel free to share. For our centering hymn, number 1007 in the teal hymnal, There's a River Flowing in My Soul. Today, we have a special collection for Friends of the Farm. And we have guests from Friends of the Farm, Becca and Heather, to come forward and tell us a little bit about it. There you go.
Testing, testing, testing. Oh, there we are. Good morning, everybody. What a pleasure to be here finally. I've known Fran for many years, and Fran is always one of those people who gives you lots of opportunities to participate in things. So you can imagine the joy in her eyes this morning when she saw me walk through the door. Yes. So I'm Becca Hansen. I am the who am I? I'm the board chair of Friends of the Farms, and with me is Heather Berger, our executive director. And quickly, Friends of the Farms is an organization that's been on the island for many years now. We really got to start in the early 2000s as a trust for working landscapes. And it was started as a result of people fearing development coming and taking away the farmlands on the island. And as a result of the work of a number of core people, there was a bond issue that was passed, the Open Space Bond issue of 2008, which then secured about 60 acres of what has come to be known as the publicly owned farmlands. That's Akio Suyamatsu's farm, the Bentron farm, Morales farm, Johnson farm, spread across the island. And so we've heard about gardens this morning several times, it's both in singing and in talking. And you ask yourself, what is a farm? Is a farm a commercial farm? Is a farm a private garden where you're growing vegetables? Is it a backyard patio where you've got a pot and you're growing vegetables? All of it has to do with feeding ourselves and enjoying getting your hands in the dirt and doing good for people and taking care of the earth. And so for our work, we think about taking care of the land, we think of taking care of the people, and we put together a number of photos which we can leave behind here or do whatever you want to, because these are our stories. These are the people that we work with and the places that we work with. And I'm going to turn this over to Heather briefly in just a second. But one of the great things that we did this year, we were fortunate enough to establish a partnership with Michael Coates, Architects, Clark Construction, Housing Resources, Bainbridge, and we created on the corner of 305 and Love Green Road 3 tiny houses, the first on the island. We got it permitted through the city. We got help with all the recycled equipment and materials. We had people out there pulling nails out of used 2x4s and unscrewing things and cutting things up. And Clark Construction completely donated the work on one of the buildings, and we're paying cut rate prices to complete our part of the bargain on the other 2 pieces. But we have 3 farm interns in there for the first time this year, and we are just delighted with the progress that we've been able to make. You want to talk some more about people?
One of my favorite stories is about these 2 people right here. They're kind of tiny, I don't know if you can see them. Lydia and Vitali. In March of 2022, their daughter, whom I had not met at the time, called me and said, my parents just arrived here from Ukraine. They lived in Mykolaiv, and their house, a rocket had gone through and just kind of destroyed their house. They managed to get here via Spain, England, Hungary, eventually to Mexico, where they walked across a foot opening in the border. At the time, they were 69 and 72. They had nothing with them but what they could carry and their cat. A very resilient people, resilient cat. And so Lena had heard about Friends of the Farms, and she called me and said, what my parents want more than anything else to help them heal is they want to put their hands in the dirt, and they want to grow food, because they had a big garden back home. And by any chance, do you know of any place where they might be able to grow something? And I said, oh, yes, I do. Yes. We happened to have a pea patch at Johnson Farm that someone had given up. And so we gave them that. But when farmer Brian McWhorter, who's over at Morales, heard about this, he said, that's not enough. They need to have more space. I have this spot in front where I was gonna plant corn this year. It's right along the road. I'll till it for them. I'll help them get plant starts. I'll let them use my tools and anything that they need. And then another farmer said, well, they're gonna need manure, so I'm gonna get them a bunch of chicken manure and I'm gonna plant some tomatoes with them. And the next thing you know, the little Ukrainian flags popped up along the road and the side of the farm, and they have one of the most beautiful and prolific farms that you could, strips of land that you can ever imagine. And you'll see them out there, and they don't speak a whole lot of English yet, but they'll wave and wave. And if you meet Vitaly more than once, he'll hug you, he gives great hugs. And so they're growing, they're sharing, they're giving things to our food banks. And it's just such a wonderful way that the land can, heal and, just bring wonderful people together. So that's one of my favorite stories.
And the last story that I'm going to share, there's so many stories that we could tell about people coming together on the land and taking care of it and growing things for themselves and one another. But down in this bottom corner, right there, we have been sitting on this piece of land called the M&E Tree Farm, 13 acres right in the middle of the island that we've wanted to do something for a long time with. But the deed of transfer then prohibited us from doing anything with commercial farming on it. There was no water on it. Pea patches were unfeasible. It was full of blackberries, but with a beautiful ravine of native plants and the headwaters of Manzanita Creek that ran through it. And then brilliant ideas come together sometimes, and what we did, or what we're doing now, is we started what's called the Bainbridge Island Native Food Forest. And so with donations and help and volunteers and kids from the island school here, and now from Blakely School, we've expanded. We've been planting native plants, including a 300-foot long native plant hedgerow. And wonder of wonders, you remember how hot it was last year? The native plants all survived. They got put in the ground, bare root, and those plants are just going to town. So Zach, who's right here, who's going to be leaving us in a couple weeks now to go hike the Pacific Crest Trail and find himself. We think he's already found himself because he's so good with the kids, but he needs that extra level of it. Has been working with the kids out there. He gets them out digging up blackberries, and they hold up the blackberries, and then getting the plants planted and taking care of it. And then cutting down the blackberries, and eventually we'll plant a pollinator garden there. So with lots of goodwill, a lot of love, a lot of hard work, things are changing at M&E Tree Farms, alias the Bainbridge Island Native Food Forest. You'll be able to graze through there and eat just about everything on there. You just have to know what you're looking for. So we'll have classes going as well too. So this year, we're looking to expand programs. I think many of you know us in the past for having thrown the Harvest Fair on Johnson Farm, and it was a wonderful activity, but holy cow, it was a lot of work and very little money. But those public celebrations are really important, and so somehow figuring out ways that coming out of COVID now, we can get back in the public eye, do the things about bringing people together and really understanding the great things that are happening on this island with people and with land and people working together to make sure that that land doesn't disappear. So thank you for having us, and thanks for being there for us. We love the stuff that you do, and thank you, Fran, for being persistent.
Well, thank you, Becca and Heather. For those of you writing a check, please make the check out to Cedars UU Church with Friends of the Farm in the subject line. And will the ushers please come forward for the collection? Thank you for your generous gifts.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello. I have forgotten everyone's names, so don't feel singled out if I don't remember yours. First reading is called Two Ships by Adam Gopnik. Gopnik wrote this in 2014, the centenary of the outbreak of World War I, and he encourages us to remember another series of events that happened shortly before the war, what he calls that catastrophe. Lodged somewhere in our collective memory of that catastrophe is an image, a metaphor of hubris from just a year or so before. A great four-funneled ocean liner, the biggest and most luxurious ever built, whose passengers, rich and poor, crowd on board, the whole watched over by a bearded man named Edward John Smith, with the chief designer Thomas Andrews along for the maiden voyage too. Then the ship sets off from Southampton, sure of itself, unsinkable, until it comes to the ice fields of the North Atlantic off the coast of Newfoundland, and speeds right on through them to its anchorage here in New York. Because this ship isn't the Titanic, but its nearly identical twin sister, the Olympic, made at the same time by the same people to do the same job in the same way. The Olympic not only successfully completed its maiden voyage, but became known as Old Reliable, serving as a troop carrier in the First World War and sailing on for 20 years more. The story, had any of you ever heard of the Olympic? The story of the two ships is one to keep in mind as we peer ahead. It reminds us that our imagination of disaster is dangerously more fertile than our imagination of the ordinary. You've certainly heard of the Titanic. You've probably never heard of the Olympic. We have a fatal attraction to fatality. We don't have one movie called Titanic starring Leo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet about a tragic love and a doomed adventure, and another called Olympic, a musical comedy starring Hugh Jackman and Anne Hathaway about a happy voyage over. We have only one movie, and remember, only one sad tale. If our history leads us to the First World War, then we imagine that we were always bound on that collision course. And we cannot imagine that with a bit of luck and another set of contingencies, we might have been on the Olympic, not the Titanic. We search for parallels of disaster and miss parallels of hope. Second reading is the concluding paragraph of A Vast Experiment, The Climate Crisis from A to Z by Elizabeth Kolbert. Climate change isn't a problem that can be solved by summoning the will. It isn't a problem that can be fixed or conquered, though these words are often used. It isn't going to have a happy ending or a win-win ending or on a human time scale, any ending at all. Whatever we might want to believe about our future, there are limits, and we are up against them. And third reading is from Mary Oliver's very familiar poem, Wild Geese. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. So in the readings. A few times over the years, I have preached about the overlooked good news that many of us are unaware of. Didn't know Nancy was going to do that. Love that. One such sermon was done as a New Year's sermon. It was I called it The Outlook for Babies 2014. And it was packed with good news about the world and its future. So I thought, well, I'll do that again. It's time to do that again. It's always been very enjoyable for me to do the research and find some of the surprising stories and statistics that are hidden in the weeds, stories akin to the story of the Olympic, that forgotten, unsinkable ship. And it's always been quite amusing to me how irritated some of my listeners are to hear good news. So attached are we to our beliefs that things are bad and getting worse all the time. This mindset, by the way, is one of the reasons that conservatives are generally happier than liberals, by the way. So I read over my previous such sermons and then started looking for updated information, updated good news, and there's a ton of it, a ton. It's amazing. But this time around, I ran smack dab into my denial about the climate crisis. Not that I am or have ever been a climate crisis denier, I just kept choosing not to deal with it from the pulpit or really at all. Call it moral cowardice, if you will, for this is what it is. But this time, I can't avoid it. I can't dodge it. In the past, I could minimize or ignore the news reports, but there was something about the wildfire smoke this past fall that penetrated my willed obliviousness. Something in those yellow-brown skies, day after day. You with me? The ash on my car. In my journal on October 20th, I wrote, "One feels caged, helpless." It's not my purpose today to talk about the climate crisis. Many of you probably know far more about it than I do. What I want to address is the despair that I see good friends succumbing to from time to time. Times when they feel caged and helpless. And then I'll tell you some shocking and possibly irritating news about good things that are happening on our planet. So tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. From time immemorial, human beings have confronted the despair of life. It's quite instructive to revisit the book of Ecclesiastes, which is part of the wisdom literature of the Hebrew Bible. So here's this guy. We don't know his name, but he was referred to as Kohelet, the preacher. This book, which we call Ecclesiastes, was written around 300 BC. It's a very surprising book to find in the Bible because it's a bitter and cynical diatribe with nothing to say about the redeeming power of God. The author, it seems to me, has, in quite a Unitarian way, taken an unvarnished look at the, I see Zachary nodding, so I'm not too far off. I'm further away from seminary than he is, so I'm always like, am I on solid ground? Takes this author, this unknown author, takes an unvarnished look at the realities of life and the inevitability of death, and he succumbs to depression. Every human effort is meaningless, vanity. After giving a pretty thorough catalog of all the evils and futilities of life, the preacher concludes that there's nothing to be done but to enjoy eating and drinking, to enjoy one's work as much as possible, to love one's family, and to behave with wisdom. People should enjoy life while they can, for a time may come when no one can. Despair may well sweep over us from time to time. It may well seem that all is vanity, hopeless. And that's probably true. Whatever we might want to believe about our future, there are limits, and we are up against them. Catastrophic global warming is happening, but it's happening fairly slowly in terms of our lifetimes. We don't live in one of the best countries for adapting to climate change, but we do live near the second best city in the United States for adapting to climate change. Anybody want to guess what number one is? Oh, okay. San Francisco. Humanity can do things that might mitigate or slow it a bit, but mostly what we'll be doing is adapting to constantly changing conditions. Very difficult after 10,000 years of fairly consistent climate conditions. So the more creative, focused, and adaptable we are as a species, the better our chances of lengthening our species' survival. In February, I visited a museum in Prescott, Arizona, the Charlotte Hall Museum. Anybody been there? No, okay, well go if you're in Arizona, it's fantastic. It has an excellent section on prehistory. I admired the great spears, the big weapons that were used for hunting, and also the delicate little arrowheads on display. I thought they were cute, maybe arrowheads that children had used when they were imitating the adult hunters. And then I learned some stuff. There was a huge environmental change that happened about 11,000 years ago. It's known as the Pleistocene-Holocene transition. The Pleistocene-Holocene transition. A great number of mammals became extinct, among them the large mammals such as mastodons, on which the people depended. Quite suddenly, within about 40 years, people were no longer feasting on giant mammals, but painstakingly hunting small mammals. The hunting knowledge of the grandparents was useless to the grandchildren, who survived by adapting to the new conditions. The giant spears were no longer of any use. Those tiny arrowheads that I thought were so cute are the relics of that adaptation. The people were now hunting little rodents in order to stay alive. What a terrible time it must have been. And yet some of the people did survive and eventually even thrived. What good does despair do? None whatsoever. We succumb to it from time to time, that's natural, but to stay locked in despair paralyzes us, prevents us from giving our gifts to the world. It prevents us from loving what's here. It prevents us from enjoying the beauty of the world, from experiencing joyful awe at creation. And that, it seems to me, is an insult to the people who will come after us, the ones who will be dealing with the worst effects of the climate catastrophe. Both despair and Pollyannaism are useless. Both, in a way, are sins. It breaks my heart when I see people I care about succumbing to the paralysis of despair. I called up one of the wisest people I know, my spiritual director, Jeannie, who's a Catholic layperson, quite active in local environmental efforts. She told me that a couple of years ago, she'd been totally overwhelmed by feelings of hopelessness when she learned about the extent of our climate situation. But she came forth from that period with a new sense of strength and resilience. Jeannie said, to spiritually overcome the paralysis, we first have to face the enormity of the tragedy and then be willing to be in the moment and be grateful that we are here and savor the beauty of the world. Our love for the world is a contribution not only to our own sense of peace, but to the health and spirit of the natural world. Our energy of savoring and loving is a tangible, healing energy. We carry that love around with us. We're open to small ways we can help, and without feeling guilty that the ways aren't bigger. And Jeannie also shared a teaching from the late Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh to be mindfully aware of our own reactions. When the distress and the despair appear in your mind, to simply say, oh, hello, there you are again, as if to a friend, and carry on with what is ours to do. Meanwhile, the world goes on. We have our lives to live. Our world is so beautiful. We do it a disservice if we let our despair block our love, our savoring of the beauty. I'd like to hold up a role model, someone I'm very close to, my partner, Nancy Flowers, who's, anyway, it's It's a little annoying as a very lazy person to live with someone like Nancy. Anyway, she has taught climate change to high school students, and retired now, she's become a citizen scientist, contributing to the data of climate change by tracking local bird populations, planting pollinator gardens, working with the stream keepers to measure bacteria levels in a local stream every week, and helping to eliminate non-native plants in a local nature sanctuary. It's exhausting to live with her. Anyway, she knows all about global warming, and she finds peace in these useful activities. She says this is a perfect time to become a citizen scientist. Meanwhile, the world goes on, and here's just a little sampling of the good news about our world. Tiny sample of the good news that goes on all the time that we don't hear about, because, generally speaking, good news happens slowly and bad news happens fast. So good news seldom makes it into the headlines and news bulletins. And if I could communicate one message to help you achieve more inner peace, I'd say if you watch the news on TV regularly, please consider cutting back or stopping entirely. It's very bad for your brain, elevating your anxiety and eventually affecting your physical health. Put yourself on a TV news diet or switch entirely to other media, especially those that intelligently digest the news and put it in context before presenting it, and media that relate the good news as well as the bad. I probably watch at the most 2 hours of TV news a year. Go ahead, be irritated with me. I felt the same way when people advised me to quit smoking. But eventually I did manage to quit. End of that part of the sermon. So here is a barrage of good news, truly just kind of random. Please don't be too shocked. Global population growth is slowing down dramatically and will inevitably decline, due in large part to the increased educational and employment opportunities for fewer people on the planet, will reduce humanity's environmental footprint and competition for resources. Since the early 1990s, the United States cancer mortality rate has fallen by 1/3. Because of global efforts to preserve the ozone layer of our atmosphere, the infamous hole in the ozone layer is disappearing, and the ozone layer is expected to be back to 1980 levels by the middle of this century. If you don't know, if this is news to you, give me a little feedback by going, I mean, I remember hearing all about the hole in the ozone layer, but where do you hear that it's gradually being fixed? The forests of New England are making a comeback. Those forests which were so decimated by farming and the Industrial Revolution that our Unitarian friend Henry David Thoreau believed the wilderness could never recover in New England. This wilderness comeback has happened so incrementally that it's easy to miss. But today, 80% of New England is covered by forest or thick woods. It is a far cry from the mere 30% that remained forested in most parts of New England in the mid-1800s. Don't do it just to make me happy. Child mortality rates have plummeted worldwide. Substantial declines in child mortality have occurred across all regions of the world. Average rates of child mortality in Africa are now lower than the average rates in Europe were in 1950. By and large, the world is much safer than it's been in centuries. There are fewer wars worldwide, and the wars that do happen are less deadly. Babies that come into the world today, anywhere in the world, have life expectancies twice as long as babies who were born in 1950. Literacy levels for the world population have risen drastically in the past couple of centuries. While in 1820, only about 12% of the people in the world could read and write, today the share has reversed. Only 14% of the world population now remain illiterate. Over the last 65 years, the global literacy rate increased by 4% every 5 years. Renewable energy sources make up a growing fraction of the energy supply, and they're getting cheaper every year. Globally, this is what hit me the most, I think. Extreme poverty has decreased drastically, especially in the last half century. A quote from Steven Pinker: "Unfortunately, the media is overly obsessed with reporting single events and with things that go wrong, and does not nearly pay enough attention to the slow developments that reshape our world. If the media accurately reported global development, a typical headline would be, 'The number of people in extreme poverty fell by 130,000 since yesterday.' And they wouldn't have this headline once, but since on average there were 130,000 people fewer in extreme poverty every single day, they should have had this headline every single day since 1990. I could go on and on, but I commend to you the fascinating and surprising source of most of this information, the website Our World in Data. Our World in Data. It's not all good news there by any means, but that's where I found this stuff. We are dishonoring the beings who will follow us if we don't love the planet now, if we don't live our full lives now and focus on what we can do, what we are called to do. I belong to our church in Shoreline, where there's this wonderful retired UU positive psychology professor, Gerald Forster. He suggests that we make a practice of asking one another what went well, very much in the spirit of what Nancy did this morning. I made a conscious practice of doing this in a recent week, especially with two rather downhearted spiritual direction clients of mine. After they talked about things that were giving them distress, I asked, "And what's going well for you?" And in both cases, they came up with far more things than they'd been consciously aware of, and were soon laughing and smiling. Perhaps you'll find this to be true for your friends and acquaintances. We might make a practice of asking one another this question: what went well? What's going well for you these days? And we might also ask this of our world: what's going well? If we look beyond the stories of doom and gloom on which our media depend, we'll find a wealth of good news, heartening trends, surprising progress, good news to sustain us through those inevitable times of despair. Well, my friends, may you savor and enjoy all the good things of your life right now. May you seek the beauty of the world, and through your love, may you find the work that is uniquely yours to do, the contribution that is uniquely yours to make. The world is too beautiful to be praised by only one voice. May you have the courage to sing your part. May you have the courage to use your gifts. Amen. And our song is Come and Go With Me to That Land. It's number 1018 in the Teal hymnal. And let's sing it with gusto. Come and go with me.
Please repeat after me as I extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth. The warmth of community or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Within each of our hearts, there is a glorious light. Go forth and bring its ray of hope to those in need. Spread the warm glow of love and share your glorious light with the world. In peace. Amen.
Amen.